Today, we are going to take you through a process that you can use to create your sales message. And to take a step back, we are actually going to create your sales message, not your sales script, because to take a step back to where we left off talking about the smart sales system, the smart sales system is a 3-level system. And level 1 is to create your sales message. This is organizing all of the thoughts, all of the talking points, all of the things you should be saying. And once we organize those, then we can use those to progress to level 2, which that's where we start to create your sales script. And level 3 is then how you use your sales scripts and emails and whatnot. So our focus today is level 1, taking you through this process to create your sales message. And basically, we're going to start with identifying some details around your product and what it includes. Then we will talk about identifying who is this sales message that we're going to create targeting. Then we will basically combine those 2 previous steps to think about when your product or service is sold to that particular buyer, what are some improvements that can be seen? And if those improvements are seen, what are some pain points that we can help make go away? And if we identify the pain points that we can help make go away, what are some questions we can ask to identify if the prospect has those pain points? And then the last step is to think of a customer example that we've delivered some of the improvements to. So really, that's the process we're going to go through here today. It's 6 steps. And while it might look like a lot, all we're really looking for is a handful of bullet points in each step. And once we have that, then we can use those bullet points to create a lot of different scripts and documents. So let's just start with the first step, which is the product. And this should be a fairly easy step for most people because we all have a lot of product knowledge in our head. We have either been trained on our product or we think about our product a lot. And so we have a lot of knowledge in our head. So the first step is let's stop and think about, okay, what is the product that we're creating this sales message for? And by the way, we use the word product a lot to refer to what it is that you're actually selling. Certainly, this process works for services. So instead of saying product or service, we just say product. In fact, this process probably works better for selling services than physical products. But whatever you're trying to sell, let's identify that. I'm actually going to use an example as we go through these 6 steps. And I'm going to try to use a common service that just about everybody can probably relate to or get their hands around. And I'm going to create a sales message for selling web design services. So once you identify what is the product that you sell or want to sell with this message, let's stop to think about what are some features that are included with that product. So with web design, we basically design and build websites, graphic design, copywriting. So either the features that are included or the scope of what's completed when the service is delivered. And by the way, this is where most salespeople kind of stop with their sales message. They think about what they sell and what it includes, and they go out and they just talk about this. Now, regarding your product, I want to push you one step further than what most salespeople do and really stop to think about how what you sell differs from your competition. Or if you are selling against the status quo, how do you differ against the option to do nothing? Differentiation is basically how are you different? So in this example, this web design firm only works with accountants and they use AI to develop the optimum website design and they guarantee results. And so that's the hope of this process, is that we are trying to identify the key things that you should be saying. Now, if you aren't different and you're the same, that's fine. No big deal. You don't have to think of stuff just to say stuff. We want you to think of the very powerful stuff that you should be saying so you don't forget it. You may actually just sell the same thing as your competition. And when you try to think about how you're different, maybe the way you do business is different. So the product or service is exactly the same, but maybe it's your pricing or your contract is different. So just something to think about there. And then we can go one step further to try to think about, are there any really strong facts about our company that we should be sharing? In this example, we won design awards for 5 years, been in business for 30 years, a woman-owned business. So if there are some really great facts about your company, we want to get that in your sales message. If you're a startup company and there's nothing real strong or worth mentioning, no big deal. You can skip that step. But that is basically it. What we've done there is we've completed step 1 and we've outlined the product or service being sold. And the next step in the process is to try to identify the particular target buyer type for this sales message. Because as you can see, the next steps that we go to are going to be identifying benefits and pain points and questions. And we are not just creating general benefits and pain points and questions. We're going to create those details that are specific to this target buyer type. This is where you start to create buyer persona focused sales messages. And this is where you become very effective. And so some things to think about when thinking about who are you creating this message for? Well, you can think about, are we targeting businesses or consumers, individuals? Are we targeting large businesses, small businesses? Is there a particular geography we're going after? Are there industries that we're targeting? And the industries, that's a good place to pause right here and talk about the impact of creating a message for a particular target buyer type. In a previous life, when I was a salesperson, I could sell software to manufacturers. My territory included manufacturers as well as hospitals. The software was the same regardless of the industry I was selling into, but the benefits and pain points were different. The way the software helped a manufacturer was different than the way that the software helped the hospital. Now, if I was a product selling salesperson, I would just go out and talk about what the software does or did from a functionality standpoint. But if you really want to go to that next level and talk about improvements, instead of just talking about general improvements, talking about how the software can help manufacturers specifically or help hospitals is where you can improve your ability to get the prospect's attention. Another example of that is that going back to that same example, I was selling software, and of course I could sell that software to IT, but I could also sell the software to finance. And IT and finance care about different things. So again, if I'm just talking about what the software does, I can say the same thing when I go from talking to finance to talking to IT. But if I'm talking about improvements or developing good lists of questions or pain points, those could all change when I change the target buyer type from finance to IT, and especially different levels in an organization. If you're selling to the top of an organization, they might have interests or pain points that are different from a frontline manager. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Here's where we left off with our example. We identified the product, web design, and this is what it includes. Now let's look at the next step. So for this example, we're going to use a target buyer type of small businesses. And so here's a good example of if I'm selling web design services, if I'm selling that to a large corporation, that would be a different sales message than to small business owners. If I'm selling to small businesses, I'm usually talking to the owner of the company, and that's going to be a different message, different sets of questions than maybe a large corporation. I might sell web design services to a director of marketing. Very different audience, slightly different sales message. Now we're moving along to step 3, and this is where we identify the value points in our sales message. So this is actually one of the more difficult steps when I work with clients, and the step is usually difficult for a couple reasons. One is I think that people often intermingle or get confused with what value and benefits are. They can be quick to think about features when you try to say, well, what are the benefits delivered? So features and benefits often get intermingled. And then there's another scenario where people are very clear on, okay, I know what benefits are, but it's hard to really stop and think about all the different ways that your product can help your customer or your prospect. So at the most basic level, what we're talking about here when we talk about value points are benefits. And benefits are not what the product does. That would be features and functionality. Benefits are the improvements that the product and features create. And that is the value that is delivered by that particular product. And it's real simple. These usually fall into a few different categories, but at the most basic level, the ways you typically help your customer are your product or service can usually help make something work better, make something easier, decrease the amount of time it takes to do something. You can often decrease cost, increase income or revenue, or decrease risk. I want to give you a tool here that you can use. You can use this when you're creating your sales message right now to help have clarity with what your benefits are. This is also a tool that you can use later when you're talking with prospects to kind of center yourself to make sure you're focusing on the value and benefits. But I'm going to use an example here, and I'm going to use selling a gym membership. The features of that are treadmills. You can picture what treadmills look like. Treadmills, weights, and classes. Now, keep in mind, those are not the product because the product is the membership. And the customer does not purchase access to a treadmill. They purchase the membership, and the feature of the membership is access to treadmills and weights and classes and access to the facility. So it's very easy for us to kind of stop, close our eyes, and think about about, okay, treadmills is an example of features. Well, the benefits of using those features and using that product is improve physical health, increase confidence, decrease medical expenses, improve personal relationships, decrease stress, improve the quality of sleep. Now, it's very easy for us to completely forget all those things. It's if you were selling a gym membership, it's real easy just to kind of keep talking about the treadmill and the spa and the classes and all of these different features. And it's easy to forget what's on the right side. But look at how powerful what is on the right side. And it's not a stretch to say any of those things can be created by that product. Those are the benefits. If you go to the gym every day, it's very realistic to see any or all of those improvements. Now, the way I want you to use this as a tool is when you're creating your sales message and thinking about your benefits, or when you're talking to prospects, is stop and think, okay, is what I'm talking about now, is that equal to a treadmill, or is that talking about changing someone's life? Am I talking about weights and classes and lap pool, or am I talking about improving personal relationships and decreasing stress? So when you're identifying the benefits for what you provide, you want to make sure and think about all of those great things that someone can improve or change by using your product or service. All right, so what I'm going to tell you now is going to get a little bit deep into how you can break down the value you offer. Basically, you can break down the improvements that you offer into 3 levels. Now, before I show you these 3 levels, I just want to point out, at the end of the day, we're looking for 3 to 5 to 6 bullet points of improvements that you can deliver. So at a minimum, that's all you have to do. But if you really want to get sophisticated and make sure you're not missing anything or build a really powerful sales message, you can actually break value down into 3 categories. And these 3 categories are good not only because you can share these different points, these different levels to different people in an organization, but they can help you make sure you're not missing anything. So the first level is technical value. And this is where you help to make something work better in terms of a process or systems, or you make employees of an organization perform better, more reliable. But this is where you might automate manual tasks, make something work better, decrease time, make something easier, improve visibility. So here's some examples. Now, these are usually very easy for someone to think about. When they start thinking about improvements, we all kind of we think about the technical improvements. But the reality is that when you create those technical improvements, most of the time, those will work their way up to create business value and business improvements. And those are in the area of improving revenue, improving income, decreasing costs, improving the way services or products are delivered or the quality of the products. And so here are some examples: improve revenue, market share, profitability, decrease costs, decrease risk, improve decision-making. And so that's level 2. And when you deliver either or both technical or business value, those usually work their way up to level 3, which is personal value. These are the improvements that you can deliver for the actual person that you're selling to. So if you're selling to a business owner or a VP of HR, when they purchase your product and use it either for their organization or for themselves, those benefits will usually work their way up to help that particular buyer in terms of improving income, career, workload. An example of that might be if a VP of an organization purchases your product or service, maybe that improves the way the organization is run, and that can help them to hit their quarterly or annual objectives and bonuses, could help them to have more recognition in the organization and improve their career, could help them to decrease their workload. Maybe they're running reports late at night, can't get home to have dinner with their family, and your service or product decreases that workload, improves their work-life balance. So these are 3 levels of value. And again, this is just to help you to kind of not miss anything and really have clarity around the value that you offer. But again, all we're looking for is a handful of improvements that you can deliver. All right, so let's get back to our example. We identified the product, web design. We're targeting small businesses. The next step is, how do our web design services help small businesses? Well, we help them to increase the revenue they generate through their website. We improve website conversion rates, and we increase their website traffic. So just 3 quick benefits there. We could go on to add more, but for demo purposes, that is the value that we offer. And notice that if we change that target buyer type to large corporations, maybe it's, improving their marketing programs, improving the alignment between sales and marketing, totally different value points. All right, so you may say that's great, and I need to figure out what value I offer, but you still might not have clarity. Well, here are some questions that you can ask yourself to try to make sure you're not missing anything or to identify the value that you offer. So here are some brainstorming questions for technical value. I'm just going to read through these. You don't have to answer all of these questions. What you're looking to do is scan these questions and think about, do I have something to talk about in that area? And if you do, try to think about how your product helps the particular buyer type in that particular area. Notice when these questions, the answers to these questions could change when you change that target buyer type. But does your product help that target to improve any processes, make anything work better, make anything easier, save time, improve visibility, improve communications, make anything more reliable, reduce effort, energy, manpower to do something, automate anything? Here are some brainstorming questions to help you to think about any business value you might offer. Does your product help the target buyer type to decrease cost, increase revenue, improve profitability, improve decision making, decrease risk, improve their products or services in any way, improve their customer satisfaction? And here are some questions to identify if you deliver any value at the personal level. Do you help your target buyer to increase their personal income, decrease personal expenses, increase the potential for promotion, increase job performance recognition, improve work-life balance, decrease stress, improve happiness, be more comfortable, improve job security, improve workplace atmosphere? So again, you don't have to answer all those. Those are just designed to jog your brain, help you to think of different ways that you might help. Now, getting back to our process, and the next step is to think about the pain points that your product or service helps to make go away. And so pain is really important to identify and to get into your sales message, because people are usually motivated to fix what's not working well or where there are problems. And let me give you an example. So think about the tires on your car. Now, there's some proactive stuff that you probably should be doing, like checking the air, rotating the tires. And then there's some reactive stuff that you have to do, like fixing a flat or replacing worn down tires. Now, think about how more responsible and the action you take in those two areas. The average person probably responds quicker when there's that problem of a tire that is flat versus staying on top of the schedule of checking the air and rotating the tires. So it's the same way with your product or service. You can find someone who's proactive and sell your product to someone where maybe there's not an immediate problem. But if you're able to find problems that your problem can solve and connect your product as the solution to that problem, you can improve your ability to communicate effectively, generate leads, and close deals. So that's what we're doing here. Now, we're not just thinking about, okay, just generally, what are the pain points that my product helps to solve? We are thinking about what are the pain points that the product can solve for the particular target buyer type for this sales message. And this step is actually easier than the last step of brainstorming benefits, because we can use a trick for our brainstorming. There is an inverse relationship between the benefits your product resolves and the pain points you make go away. Let me give you an example. So if you sell a pillow that helps someone to sleep at night, the benefit is that they sleep like a baby and they sleep better. Well, what is the opposite of sleeping better at night? The opposite is tossing and turning. So if you brainstorm your product to find benefits such as sleeping better at night, you can look at that and say, what is the opposite of that? And usually come up with an inversely related pain point, which is tossing and turning. So if you come up with 3 to 6 good benefits, you should be able to come up with 3 to 6 opposite pain points for each improvement. Basically, each improvement your product can make is usually inversely related to some sort of problem that your product can help make go away. Now, in the same way that there are 3 levels for benefits and value points, there are 3 levels for pain points. And again, just to let you know, we're just looking for 3 to 6 pain points that you can help make go away. But if you want to make sure you're not missing anything, the lowest level is technical value. And this is where there could be problems with things not working well in terms of processes or systems or people. And so some examples of that might be things are manual, things aren't working well, it takes a lot of time and effort to do stuff, things are difficult, and it's difficult to see what's going on, performance isn't good. When there are technical problems, those will usually work their way up to create business problems in the form of revenue is not what it needs to be, the costs are high, products and delivery of services is not good. And when there are both business and technical problems, there are usually personal pain experienced by maybe the owner of the company or the manager of the department in terms of they're not hitting their objectives, not making bonuses, their job is in jeopardy, they're working a lot. These are the three levels of pain points that maybe your product or service can make go away. Right. And let's get back to our example here. So we're selling web design services, we're targeting small businesses, and these are the three improvements that we can make. And using the tip that I gave you, we can basically think about what are the three opposite points to those benefits there. And here are three opposite points. So if we help to increase revenue through the website, there's a need to generate more revenue through the website. If we improve conversion rates, then the problem is that the website visitors aren't converting in terms to customers, and at least not at the level that they need. So that's an example there with the three benefits led us to three related pain points. And we're moving along here. The next step is to think about questions to ask. As you know, we believe that the best salesperson is the one that asks the best questions. And you may agree with that, but you may say, but I just don't really know what questions to ask. This process is going to help you to have clarity for which questions to ask. And the way it works is that going back to sort of how we looked at the value points, and that led us to three related pain points, we can look at the pain points, and for each pain point, we can come up with a pain question. Going back to that example of the sleeping better at night equals a pain point of tossing and turning, if that's a pain point that your product or service can help make go away, then a good question to ask is, how well are you sleeping at night? How many nights a week are you tossing and turning? Do you feel rested when you wake up? So those are all good questions to ask based on that one pain point. Now, as we're composing your pain questions, I do want you to be aware that pain can be challenging to uncover for a couple reasons. One is the prospect may have latent pain, which means that the pain is there, but they don't know it. I'll give you an example. Let's say that your product or service helps people that have a gas leak in their car. And you could approach a prospect that has a gas leak, but they don't know it. They don't know it because the car is operating at a decent level. They're leaking gas, but it's not noticeable. So they have the problem that you can help to solve. And if you were to ask a question of, do you currently have a gas leak? They would say, no, everything's fine, because as far as they know it is, but they actually do have a problem that you can fix. So when you're composing your questions, you can try to keep this in mind. For example, if you ask questions of, are you having to fill up your vehicle more than you used to? Are your fuel costs higher than they used to be? When you look at the ground where your car is usually parked, is there any residue or gas on the ground? So those are questions that can help you to identify if there's pain where you think that the pain might be latent pain. Another scenario could be that the prospect is in a state of denial in terms of denying that they have any pain. So maybe you ask them about something that's not working well and they deny that they have that issue. This is just something to be aware of, and it's composing good questions that can help you to identify if there is indeed pain. So going back to this process, we're selling web design to small businesses, and we help in those ways and we solve those problems. We can use those pain points to basically come up with three related pain questions. So if we solve the problems of generating revenue through the website, we can ask the question of how important is it to get more revenue out of the website? How important is it to improve website conversion rates? So those are pain questions. And there's another category of questions that you can ask, which I consider to be current state questions. Now, these will vary depending on what you sell, but here are some examples for this particular example. So if we sell web design services, then you might want to ask, do you have someone that can make changes to your website? Are you currently working with an agency? Are you happy with the person who's making changes? When was the last time you refreshed your website? So you're trying to identify what's going on in the area where you have something to sell. Another example of current state questions would be if you sold cars, this would be asking, do you have a car today? What year is it? What make and model? Is it meeting your needs? How well is it running? How often do you currently replace your vehicles? So you're trying to identify what's going on there. When you combine your current state with your pain questions, you should have a good set of questions to ask in your sales message when you're trying to generate leads and start initial conversations. And so here are a few tips on composing your questions, because how you word your questions will greatly impact your ability to get the prospect talking and to extract information. So the first tip is to try to use open-ended questions. So it can be very easy to look at your pain points and real quickly create closed questions that start with a do you have, and then you insert the pain point. So for example, if your pain point that you're trying to fix is, do you have trouble sleeping at night? It can be very easy just to put a do you have in front of there to say, do you have trouble sleeping at night? This isn't optimum because the prospect can answer with yes or no, which doesn't get the conversation going. And if they're trying to get rid of you, they might just quickly say no, and then you don't have anywhere to go there. So try to change those to be more open. And one way to do that is to start your questions with, how do you feel about blank? So if we apply that to a different area, how do you feel about the amount of time it takes to train new salespeople? How concerned are you about the amount of time it takes to train new salespeople? How happy are you with the amount of time it takes to train new salespeople? So you're not being very specific saying, how long does it train new salespeople? Because the answer there might mean something different to you than it means to them. You're asking them, how do they feel about it? Another way to phrase questions is to say, how important is it for you to? So how much of a priority is it for you to find new ways to increase website traffic? How important is it for you to find new ways to increase website traffic? When was the last time? How often do you experience errors in your invoice? When was the last time you analyzed your invoices for errors? How often do you reconcile your vendor invoices? So just some ideas there. And then at the end of the day, there are good times to ask yes or no questions when you are looking for a very specific answer, and that specific answer can maybe generate a lead for you or tell you what direction to go with the prospect. But maybe something very specific. Do you currently have a system in place for error scanning? Maybe you help with error scanning and that's a big issue, and just being very direct. That's a closed question. I just said don't ask closed questions, but sometimes it does make sense. Have you ever had trouble synchronizing data across systems? That's a yes or no question. Maybe having a very specific answer there is helpful. Is your process for transferring sales data manual? The other thing with asking questions is you want to keep in mind that when you look at a pain point, that may lead you to composing what you think sounds like a great pain question, but you have to keep in mind that what you're asking about, the prospect may find invasive, and they may find it invasive either because of the type of information you're asking about, or because they have a level of ego and they don't want to share that with you, or they don't want, if something's not working well, it may not shine well in terms of how good of a job they're doing. So for example, let's say you can help with compliance. You might not want to ask a cold prospect if they're in compliance, because they might not want to share that with you, and that might not start a real healthy conversation. So you could soften that with the how do you feel about your ability to meet compliance? So you're not saying, are you in compliance? How do you feel about your ability to meet compliance? How concerned are you about getting fined for compliance issues? So you're not saying, are you potentially getting fined? Are you going to get fined? You're saying, how concerned are you about it? How important is it for you to improve your ability to stay compliant? So that's an example of using those different, how do you feel, how important question starter tips to soften something that might be a very sensitive, invasive pain point or area. All right, moving right along, we're at the last step here. And the last step is to compose a name drop example. And this is basically a customer example that we can share. And one of the best ways to not only build interest, so we want to build interest so we can generate a lead and ultimately close a sale, but we also want to establish credibility so that the prospect thinks that we're reliable in terms of doing business with us and in terms of our product doing what we say it will do. And so one of the best ways to check both of those boxes is not necessarily by talking about your product more, but by sharing an example of how your product helped another customer. And so we actually have a little template builder that you can use to create a name drop example. And a name drop example that we basically use, it's a 2-sentence blurb that our tool will help you to create, and you can insert that blurb into your cold emails, voicemails, cold call scripts, and whatnot. In order to fill out and use our little template generator, which by the way is what we'll look at in the next training module when we put your scripts together, we just simply need you to answer 4 questions. So we want the name of a previous or current customer. And by the way, if you don't have a customer that you can share their name, you could just use the label description of somebody. So if you, instead of saying, like if you're creating a sales message for dentists, a good name drop would be another dentist. So your name drop should be somewhat aligned with the target buyer type. And instead of mentioning the dentist's name, you could say a small dental family practice. That could be the answer for number 1 here. Then number 2 is the product or service that you sold them. Then 3 is the initial or technical improvement. So that would probably be like level 1 of the 3 levels of value. So we're looking for like a process or system or something we made work better. And then 4 is the ultimate or business improvement. So that would be level 2 in terms of improving revenue or making something work better from a business standpoint. Once you have those 4 answers, basically you can plug those into a template that we create. And so here's an example of using the template builder, and we'll show you the templates more in the next training module. But so we take the value points from up above to create this name drop example. We worked with an accounting firm and helped them to do a complete refresh of their corporate website. This helped them to improve how they told their story of what they do and the services they provide. After only 6 months, they increased the number of leads that they were generating through their website by over 500% and increased overall revenue. There's a name drop example, and we can again plug that into all different places in our sales scripts and emails, and you can see the power there in terms of how that can help you to sell the product, build interest, and create credibility. And that is pretty much it. So what we just did there is we went through those 6 steps and created a sales message, and this is basically what your sales message might look like. And this might look like a lot, but really for each of those steps, we just have a handful of bullet points. And again, we can use all of those bullet points to basically create your scripts. And the way that works is each of those steps and each of those boxes creates what we call a building block. So you have a building block for value points, a building block for pain points, a building block for pain questions, and whatnot. And what we're going to do in the next training module is basically when you have those building blocks, we can mix and match them to create a lot of different documents. And that's actually where Sales Scripter, the software, comes from, is that I realized at one point that if I have all those individual blocks, I can create a lot of different documents. And that's what I was doing for my clients. And then I realized, well, if I create a software that allows a user to build those blocks on their own by answering questions, and then the software can mix and match those blocks to create a variety of different documents, that might be something. That's when we started creating Sales Scripter, and that's basically how Sales Scripter works. So we just finished level 1 for you, creating your sales message. Now we're going to move to level 2 in the next training module, and we're basically going to use all of those blocks to create all of these different documents. And here's where we are in the schedule. So that will be the next training module. We're going to create sales scripts, create emails, voicemails, objection responses, and more. And that's what we will talk about next. If you found this to be helpful, and if this helped you with at least one tip that you can apply, you can return the favor to us by either liking, commenting, sharing, or subscribing to our channel. Any of those will help us tremendously in terms of the YouTube algorithm, and it's a great way to help us if we've helped you. We greatly appreciate it. Also, follow us on any of these social platforms. We've been producing large form content on YouTube for years. Now we're trying to slice and dice that long form content in the format of 30 to 60-minute sales tips, and we're posting those daily on all of these social platforms. So follow us on any of those. If you want more information on how the SMART sales system can help you. Basically, everything we showed you today was part of the SMART sales system. And the SMART sales system stands for sales messaging and response tactics. So as you can see here, the whole process we gave you here was how to build your sales message. So you can see how that is foundational to the SMART sales system. And we'll get into how you can use that sales message and build out your responses and tactics in the upcoming training modules. All of that is outlined in the book, The SMART Sales System, Sell Smarter, Not Harder. And if you want to get a copy of your book, you can get that on Amazon here. And if you're not ready to buy the book yet, or you don't want to spend any money, no problem at all. The SMART Sales System sales methodology is actually all on YouTube for free. There's basically a video for each chapter in the book, so you can get it there. If you don't want to purchase anything, no big deal. The reason why we give away a lot of our training for free on YouTube is because of the second leg in this 3-legged stool, is that we offer a software platform called Sales Scripter, and I've mentioned it a couple times here. But basically, Sales Scripter has, here today we took you through the process of creating your sales message. Sales Scripter has a tool called the Sales Message Builder, and it will take you through all those steps and give you a place to do that brainstorming. And when you dump those bullet points and those thoughts into the Sales Message Builder, then the software links all those building blocks to a library of scripts and emails. And there's also CRM functionality, email automation, depending on the subscription you purchase. And the third leg of the 3-legged stool is professional services. So certainly we provide consulting and coaching and can work with you to create your script, create your sales message, and we do that all the time. If you want more information, please go to salesscripter.com for more information. Hope this was helpful, and we'll look for you on the next training video. Have a great day.